The CEO thought his janitor lived paycheck to paycheck, until one day he followed him after work and saw him handing half his salary to an orphanage. In that moment, the CEO realized who the real leader was. The office was nearly silent that night. The hum of the air conditioner and the faint tapping of rain against the windows were the only sounds breaking the stillness. Daniel Rhodes, the CEO, sat behind his massive oak desk, eyes fixed on spreadsheets glowing across his monitor. Numbers had always made sense to him: profit margins, growth percentages, and projections. They were predictable, controllable. People, however, were not. Through the glass wall of his office, Daniel noticed movement in the hallway. It was Miguel, the janitor, the same older man who quietly cleaned the offices every night without fail. Daniel barely noticed him most days. Miguel was part of the scenery, someone who existed on the edges of the company's success. Tonight, though, Daniel's eyes lingered. Miguel moved slower than usual, his tired face framed by silver hair and lines carved deep by time. After finishing the last section of the floor, he looked at his old wristwatch and sighed softly. Then Daniel saw it, Miguel pulling a small, worn envelope from his jacket pocket, sealing it carefully as if it held something precious. He tucked it away and left in a hurry. Something about that moment unsettled Daniel. Without fully understanding why, he grabbed his coat and followed. Outside, the night was cold, the rain thin and steady. Miguel's figure moved down the dimly lit street, his coat pulled tight around him. Daniel trailed behind in his car, headlights dimmed. He wasn't sure what he was expecting to find. Curiosity mixed with something else, a faint sense of shame that he had never once spoken more than a polite good evening to this man. Miguel eventually turned down a narrow road leading to an older part of the city. The streets here were cracked, the lamps flickered, and small houses leaned tiredly against the night. Daniel parked quietly and watched as Miguel approached a building at the end of the block. The faded sign above the door read, "St. Mary's Orphanage." Daniel frowned. Miguel knocked softly, and after a moment, a woman in her 50s opened the door. Her face lit up the moment she saw him. She hugged him warmly as if greeting an old friend. Miguel handed her the envelope. The woman opened it slightly, gasped, and shook her head, clearly overwhelmed. Miguel smiled, almost embarrassed, and gestured for her to take it. She wiped her eyes before hugging him again. Then he turned and walked away into the rain. Daniel sat frozen in his car, unable to process what he'd just seen. He watched Miguel disappear down the dark street, his figure shrinking beneath the glow of the streetlights. A man who made barely $2,000 a month had just given away what looked like half of it. Daniel had signed million-dollar checks without blinking, yet he couldn't remember the last time he'd done something that pure. As the orphanage door closed, the sound of faint laughter drifted through the night. Daniel leaned back in his seat, staring out the windshield, his reflection blurred by the raindrops. For the first time in a long while, he felt something unfamiliar, a quiet ache in his chest and a question echoing in his mind. Why would someone who had so little give so much? The next morning, the city was alive with motion, but Daniel felt detached from it all. The memory of last night played over in his mind like a movie he couldn't pause. He sat in his glass-walled corner office, watching employees rush through the lobby below. Suits, laptops, lattes, all chasing deadlines and bonuses. And somewhere among them was Miguel, mopping the marble floors before the rest of the world even noticed him. Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring at the skyline. His reflection looked distant, almost hollow. He thought about the envelope, the rain, the orphanage. He couldn't shake it. For years, his life had been measured in profits, not purpose. His mornings began with caffeine and ended with champagne. His home was filled with expensive things but no warmth. Even the laughter of his children felt like echoes now. They had grown up in boarding schools, speaking to him mostly through short calls and polite text messages. Miguel, on the other hand, lived on $2,000 a month and somehow found more joy, more meaning than Daniel ever had. Later that day, he watched as Miguel quietly moved through the hallways, nodding politely to those who passed. No one really saw him. They just stepped aside, lost in their own importance. Daniel noticed every detail now: the frayed cuffs of Miguel's uniform, the careful way he wiped down the tables, the faint hum of an old song under his breath. There was no resentment in his movements, no bitterness in his face, just peace. During the lunch break, Daniel's executive team gathered around the sleek conference table. They were discussing cost cuts, ways to optimize expenses. One of the suggestions on the list caught Daniel's attention: outsource janitorial work. "We could save about 30% if we go external," one executive said confidently. "It's low-skill labor anyway." Daniel's stomach turned. He didn't say anything at first, just nodded slowly while their words echoed in his mind. Low-skill labor. That's how he'd thought too, before last night. He looked out through the glass wall and saw Miguel pushing his mop, completely unaware that his job was being debated just a few feet away. There was something deeply wrong with that picture. After the meeting, Daniel walked out of the conference room and stopped near the lobby. He watched Miguel again, who was now polishing the elevator doors, his reflection merging with the metal surface. Daniel realized how invisible the man had become to everyone, including himself. When Miguel noticed him watching, he smiled and nodded politely. "Good afternoon, Mr. Rhodes," he said. "Good afternoon, Miguel," Daniel replied, almost surprised by how strange it felt to actually say his name. "How's everything?" Miguel chuckled softly. "Same as always, sir. Blessed to have work." Daniel hesitated, searching for something to say, but words failed him. He just nodded and walked away, feeling the weight of those simple words, blessed to have work. That night, Daniel sat alone in his penthouse, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. The city lights stretched endlessly, but they didn't impress him anymore. He kept thinking of the man who had nothing yet seemed to have everything that mattered. Over the next few days, Daniel found himself watching Miguel more often than he meant to. It wasn't out of pity or curiosity anymore, it was fascination. There was something steady about the man, something unshakable. Every morning, before the rest of the staff arrived, Miguel was already there, quietly cleaning the lobby floors until they gleamed. He greeted the security guards with warmth, offered spare change to the parking attendant, and even brought coffee for the receptionist who always forgot to eat breakfast. None of it seemed forced. It was just who he was. Daniel couldn't remember the last time he'd done something kind without expecting something in return. On Wednesday, the executive board gathered again. They were finalizing the new quarterly cost-cutting plan. Miguel's position was still on the list. One of the managers joked that the cleaning staff could easily be replaced by a cheaper agency. The room laughed lightly, but Daniel didn't. He stared at the spreadsheet in front of him, the line item labeled Facilities Budget Reduction. It wasn't a number anymore, it was a person. A person who gave half his paycheck to children who had nothing. He looked up, his voice cutting through the laughter. "We'll table that discussion," he said flatly. The room went quiet. "I don't think we need to rush into replacing anyone," he added. A few people exchanged confused glances, but no one argued. The meeting moved on. Afterward, Daniel stepped out for air. The day was warm, sunlight spilling across the glass facade of the building. Outside, near the service entrance, Miguel was sitting on a small bench, eating his lunch from a metal container. It looked simple: rice, beans, a piece of bread, but he ate it as if it were a feast. When he noticed Daniel, he stood quickly. "Oh, sorry, Mr. Rhodes," he said. "Didn't mean to be in the way." Daniel waved him off. "You're not in the way, Miguel. Sit, please." Miguel hesitated, then sat down again, his posture polite but nervous. "How long have you been working here?" Daniel asked. Miguel smiled faintly. "Almost 10 years now, sir. Time flies when you're grateful." Daniel nodded, unsure how to respond. "And you're happy here?" Miguel thought for a moment. "Happy? Yes, I suppose I am. I have work, I have food." "That's more than I had once." His tone was light, but there was depth beneath it. Daniel studied him quietly. There was no envy in his voice, no bitterness, just contentment. "Do you ever wish you had more?" Daniel asked. Miguel looked up, squinting against the sun. "More money, maybe, but I think peace is worth more than any paycheck." His answer lingered long after Daniel walked back inside. That evening, as the office lights dimmed and people went home, Daniel stayed behind again. He watched from his window as Miguel mopped the last hallway, humming softly. For the first time, Daniel realized that the man he'd overlooked for years might understand something about life that all his wealth had blinded him from. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The image of Miguel sitting on that bench replayed in his mind, the calm in his eyes, the quiet certainty in his words. Peace is worth more than any paycheck. It sounded so simple, yet it unsettled him more than any business problem ever had. Around midnight, Daniel found himself back in his office. The city outside glowed with restless energy, cars, lights, movement, but inside it was silent. He opened Miguel's employee file, something he'd never done before. There wasn't much in it. Birth date, address, salary, $2,000 a month just like he remembered. No benefits, no bonuses, just enough to get by. And yet the man smiled every single day. Daniel shut the file slowly and exhaled. He couldn't understand it. The next evening, he stayed late again, pretending to finish work. Miguel was, as always, the last to leave. Daniel watched from his office window as the janitor clocked out, pulled on his worn jacket, and walked out into the night. This time, Daniel didn't hesitate. He grabbed his keys and followed, keeping his car a few blocks behind. Miguel's route took him away from the city center, past convenience stores and small diners, until the bright lights gave way to quiet streets and older buildings. He stopped at a small grocery shop, bought a few bags of rice, canned goods, and a box of milk. Daniel frowned. The items weren't much, but for someone making $2,000 a month, they were significant. Miguel paid in cash and left with a small smile to the cashier. Daniel followed again. 10 minutes later, Miguel arrived at the same orphanage Daniel had seen days before. He knocked softly, greeted the caretaker with warmth, and handed her the bags. She hugged him again, just as before, tears in her eyes. Daniel parked across the street, watching in silence. He saw children run to the door, laughing and clinging to Miguel's arms. They knew him, trusted him. He played with them for a few minutes, ruffling their hair, listening to their stories. Then he waved goodbye, his smile illuminated by the porch light, before heading back down the dark road. Daniel stayed where he was long after Miguel disappeared. The sound of laughter from inside the orphanage carried through the open window of his car. It hit him deeper than he expected. For years, Daniel had given donations, large checks to charities, sponsorships, all the right things to make headlines. But they never felt like this. This wasn't a photo opportunity. This was real, human, and quiet. Driving home, Daniel felt small in a way he never had before. His penthouse was immaculate, expensive, and empty. He sat by the window, looking out at the skyline he once admired. All the luxury he'd built felt meaningless compared to the light he'd seen in those children's eyes. Somewhere in the noise of his success, he had lost the very thing Miguel seemed to have found without trying. For the first time, Daniel wasn't sure who was richer, the CEO in the tower or the janitor in the rain. The next morning, Daniel arrived at work earlier than usual. The air in the office felt heavier, quieter somehow. He walked past the lobby where Miguel was polishing the marble floor, humming that same tune. Daniel paused, watching him for a moment before continuing to his office. He couldn't concentrate. Every report, every email felt meaningless. The question kept circling in his head like a whisper he couldn't silence. What makes a man give away what little he has? That evening, he decided to find out. When Miguel finished his shift, Daniel called out from his office doorway. "Miguel, do you have a minute?" Miguel turned, surprised. "Of course, sir." He stepped in, removing his cap and holding it respectfully in his hands. "Please sit," Daniel said, gesturing toward a chair. Miguel hesitated before sitting down, clearly nervous. Daniel studied him for a moment, unsure where to begin. "I hope you don't mind me asking something personal," Daniel said carefully. "It's about the orphanage." Miguel's eyes flickered with surprise but not fear. He nodded slowly. "You saw me?" Daniel nodded. "A few times, yes. I wanted to understand why. You don't make much, Miguel, yet you give so much away. Why?" Miguel looked down at his hands, silent for a moment. Then he smiled softly. Because once, someone did the same for me. He leaned back in the chair, his gaze distant. I grew up in that orphanage, sir. My parents died when I was a child. I was angry, hungry, alone. The sisters there took me in, gave me food, taught me how to live right. When I turned 18, they gave me a little money and told me to make a life. I promised myself that if I ever earned anything, I'd give half back to help the next child like me. Daniel listened quietly, his throat tight. Miguel continued, I don't have much, but I have enough. Every month, I give what I can. I visit the children. I fix the broken swings, bring them food. They don't need to know who I am, only that someone cares. Daniel felt something shift inside him. He had spent decades chasing success, believing money was a measure of worth. But here sat a man who had nothing by comparison, yet gave like he owned the world. Don't you ever wish you kept it for yourself? Daniel asked softly. Miguel chuckled. For what, sir? A bigger TV? A new car? I sleep well at night. That's worth more than anything I could buy. His tone wasn't proud, it was peaceful. Daniel nodded slowly, unable to speak. For a moment, neither said anything. The ticking of the office clock filled the silence. When Miguel stood to leave, Daniel said quietly, You've taught me something today, Miguel. Something I should have learned a long time ago. Miguel smiled and placed his cap back on his head. Maybe we all just need reminding sometimes, sir. When he left, Daniel sat alone in the quiet office, staring out at the city lights. For the first time in years, he didn't see buildings or profits, he saw people. And one of them had just changed him forever. That night, Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying Miguel's words again and again. I sleep well at night. He hadn't felt that kind of peace in years. The numbers in his mind, profits, losses, goals, had always kept him restless. But now there was something deeper stirring inside him, something he couldn't ignore. By morning, the world looked different. The skyscrapers outside his window didn't seem like monuments of success anymore. They looked like walls he had built around himself. He went to work early again, but this time he didn't go straight to his office. Instead, he walked through the hallways, noticing everything he'd overlooked before. The receptionist's tired smile, the intern rushing with coffee stains on his shirt, the janitor's cart parked quietly by the service door. For the first time, he felt the pulse of the place, not as a machine of profit, but as a collection of human lives. Later that day, during a meeting with the board, Daniel found himself distracted. The team was discussing another expansion plan, a new office overseas, higher margins, bigger contracts. It all sounded like noise. One of the executives asked, Daniel, what do you think? He paused. I think we've been measuring the wrong things. The room fell silent. What good is growth? He continued slowly, if it doesn't make us better people? The others exchanged confused looks, unsure how to respond. Daniel ended the meeting early, saying he needed time to think. That evening, he found himself driving aimlessly, without a destination. Eventually, his car stopped in front of St. Mary's orphanage. The lights inside glowed warm against the darkening sky. He sat there for a long time before stepping out. The caretaker, the same woman he had seen before, opened the door, surprised. Mr. Rhodes, she asked. Daniel smiled awkwardly. You know me, she nodded. Miguel speaks of you kindly. He said you're a good man, even if you don't know it yet. Her words disarmed him. Inside, the orphanage was humble, old walls, mismatched furniture, drawings taped to the windows, yet it felt alive. The laughter of children filled every corner. Daniel watched them play, their joy pure and unfiltered. How do you manage this place? He asked. The woman sighed. Barely, donations help, but we make do. Miguel helps more than anyone, he's the heart of this place. Daniel looked around, his chest tightening. He pulled out his wallet, offering a thick envelope of cash. Please take this, he said. For repairs, for whatever you need. She hesitated. That's very kind, but we don't want charity, we want community. Daniel nodded slowly, humbled. Then maybe I can be part of that, she smiled. That's what Miguel said the first time he came here. Daniel laughed softly, the tension breaking. For the first time in years, giving didn't feel like loss, it felt like returning something he'd forgotten he owed. As he stepped back into the cool night, the The children's laughter followed him, echoing in his heart long after the door closed. The following days felt different for Daniel. The office didn't look the same anymore. The polished floors, the glass walls, the steady rhythm of phones and keyboards, it all seemed hollow now. He still went through the motions, still led meetings and signed papers, but something inside him had shifted. Every time he saw Miguel pushing his cleaning cart, that quiet smile on his face, Daniel felt a mix of admiration and guilt. How had he missed this man's presence for so many years? One afternoon, Daniel stood by his window, looking out at the city while Miguel worked in the background. The janitor was whistling softly, mopping near the elevators. The contrast struck him, one man at the top of the building, another scrubbing its floors, and yet only one of them seemed truly content. Daniel closed his laptop and walked out of his office. "Miguel," he called. The janitor straightened and turned, a bit startled. "Yes, sir?" Daniel nodded toward the nearby chairs. "Join me for a coffee." Miguel blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Sir, me?" Daniel smiled. "Yes, you." Moments later, they sat in the small break room, steam rising from their paper cups. Daniel broke the silence first. "Do you ever regret staying here all these years?" Miguel took a slow sip before answering. "Regret? No, sir. This job gave me stability. It's honest work. Every clean floor reminds me I'm useful to someone." Daniel leaned back, thinking about that. "But you could have done more, found a higher-paying job maybe." Miguel shrugged. "Maybe, but money isn't the only way to be rich." Daniel looked at him, searching for words. "You're not afraid of having too little." Miguel smiled gently. "I'm more afraid of forgetting to be grateful for what I have." The simplicity of that answer pierced deeper than any lecture Daniel had ever heard. After that day, something changed. Daniel started walking the floors more often, not as a CEO, but as a man trying to understand the world he had built. He spoke to employees by name, asked about their families, their lives. The office, once sterile and cold, began to feel more human. People noticed the change. Miguel noticed it most. A week later, Daniel stood before the mirror in his office, studying his reflection. The man staring back didn't look different, but he felt different. The hunger that once drove him had softened into something else, a need to make his success mean something. That evening, he drove back to the orphanage, but this time he didn't come alone. In the trunk of his car were boxes filled with supplies, new toys, and food. The children ran to greet him, their laughter echoing through the courtyard. The caretaker smiled, surprised. "You came back." Daniel nodded. "I had to." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel sat beside Miguel on the orphanage steps. They didn't speak much, just watched the kids play. For the first time, silence didn't feel empty, it felt full. Daniel finally understood what peace sounded like. Weeks passed, and the small changes in Daniel's life began to ripple outward. The more time he spent at the orphanage, the more he saw what real fulfillment looked like. The laughter of the children, the smell of fresh paint on the newly repaired walls, the joy on the caretaker's face when they received enough food to last the month. It all filled a space inside him that had been empty for years. He started coming every Saturday, bringing employees who wanted to help. At first, only a handful joined him out of curiosity, but as word spread, more began to show up. Accountants, managers, interns, they all took turns painting walls, building playgrounds, and reading stories to the kids. Miguel never sought recognition, but everyone knew he was the reason this new spirit had started. He worked quietly, guiding others with gentle encouragement, never taking credit. Daniel often watched him from a distance, still in awe. Here was a man who had built an empire of kindness without owning a single company. One afternoon, Daniel pulled Miguel aside. "You've been the heart behind all this," he said. "I want you to help me lead something bigger." Miguel frowned slightly. "What do you mean, sir?" "I want to start a foundation," Daniel explained. "A program that supports orphanages across the city. You understand this better than anyone. I want you to run it." Miguel blinked, overwhelmed. "Me? I'm just a janitor." Daniel shook his head. "You're not just anything. You've been doing this work your whole life. You know what matters." Miguel hesitated, his voice trembling. "I don't know if I'm the right man for that." Daniel smiled. You're exactly the right man." That evening, Miguel stood before the children at St. Mary's and told them the news. His voice cracked as he spoke, his hands trembling. "Mr. Rhodes wants us to help more children like you," he said softly. "We'll be able to fix other orphanages, buy more supplies, maybe even build new homes." The children cheered, their laughter echoing off the old walls. Daniel stood at the back of the room, feeling a warmth he couldn't describe. For once, success wasn't measured in profit but in smiles. Over the next few weeks, the Heart of Hands Foundation took shape. Daniel provided the funding, but Miguel became its soul. He organized visits, recruited volunteers, and managed donations with a precision that impressed even Daniel's executives. The company began to change too. Employees who once chased bonuses started asking how they could contribute. The sterile corporate atmosphere slowly transformed into something alive. One night, after a long day of work at the orphanage, Daniel and Miguel sat outside under the fading light. "You've done something incredible," Daniel said quietly. Miguel smiled. "We've done it together." They looked out at the children running across the courtyard, their laughter rising into the warm night air. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt truly proud, not of his wealth, but of what it could finally do. The months that followed were unlike anything Daniel had experienced in his entire career. The Heart of Hands Foundation grew faster than anyone expected. What started as one small act of kindness began spreading through the company like light filling a dark room. Every department wanted to take part. Marketing teams offered their skills to promote local charity drives, the accounting department helped track donations, and even clients began contributing after hearing the story of the janitor who gave half his paycheck to orphans. For the first time, Daniel's company wasn't just known for its success, it was known for its heart. The shift was subtle at first. Employees smiled more. Meetings felt less mechanical, conversations more human. The walls that once echoed with deadlines and stress now carried the hum of purpose. Daniel would walk through the office and hear stories of small acts, an intern paying for a coworker's lunch, an executive volunteering on weekends, staff raising funds for children's hospitals. Kindness had become contagious. Miguel, now the director of the foundation, refused to move into a fancy office. He still wore his same work clothes, still arrived early, and still swept the hallways from time to time. "Old habits," he'd joke when people caught him. But Daniel knew the truth. Miguel stayed grounded because he never wanted to forget where he came from. One afternoon, Daniel invited the entire staff to a company-wide event. The conference room was decorated simply, with photos of the orphanage lining the walls. Miguel stood nervously beside him as Daniel took the stage. "I built this company with the goal of being the best," Daniel began. "But I realized something along the way, being the best doesn't matter if you're not doing good." He paused, looking at Miguel. This man reminded me of that. The room erupted in applause. Miguel's eyes shimmered and he lowered his head, overwhelmed. Daniel continued, "From today forward, every employee will dedicate 1 hour each week to service, whether it's helping the community, mentoring someone, or simply showing kindness. We're calling it 1 Hour of Heart." The announcement was met with cheers and tears alike. It wasn't just a policy, it was a promise. Over time, the ripple extended far beyond the company walls. Other businesses adopted similar programs. News outlets shared Miguel's story, calling him the man who changed a CEO. But Miguel never let fame touch him. When a reporter asked what motivated him, he simply said, "Because once someone was kind to me, I'm just passing it on." Daniel watched all of it with a quiet pride he'd never known before. His empire had been built on ambition, but now it stood on compassion. The profits continued to rise, but that no longer mattered. What mattered were the letters from children, the laughter in the hallways, and the peace he saw in Miguel's eyes. It was proof that one small act, done with love, could transform everything it touched. A year later, the city skyline glowed under a soft sunset as Daniel parked outside St. Mary's orphanage once again. The building looked different now: fresh paint, repaired windows, a new playground filled with laughter. It was no longer a place barely surviving, it was thriving. Children chased each other across the courtyard, their laughter spilling into the evening air. Daniel stepped out of his car, holding a box of supplies, and was immediately greeted by a chorus of little voices shouting his name. He smiled, kneeling to hand out small gifts, books, art supplies, and toys. The caretaker appeared at the door, her eyes warm with gratitude. "You've changed this place, Mr. Rhodes," she said softly. Daniel shook his head. "No," he replied, glancing toward the garden. He did. Under the fading light, Miguel was there, sitting on a bench with a small group of children gathered around him. He was teaching them how to fold paper cranes, his hands moving slowly, patiently. Daniel walked over and sat beside him. Miguel looked up, smiling. "You made it," he said. "I wouldn't miss it," Daniel replied. They sat quietly for a moment, watching the children's hands clumsily mimic Miguel's movements. The sound of laughter and the gentle rustle of paper filled the air. Daniel turned to him. "You know, you've built something extraordinary," Miguel chuckled. "I didn't build anything, sir. I just gave what I could. The rest followed." Daniel nodded, eyes soft. "Still, you've changed more lives than you realize, mine included." Miguel looked down at the small crane in his hands. "Funny thing about giving," he said. "You think you're helping others, but it ends up healing you too." The simplicity of the words lingered in the air like a quiet truth. They watched as a little girl proudly held up her first folded crane, her smile wide and pure. Miguel clapped for her, and Daniel joined in, laughing. The sun dipped lower, painting the courtyard in gold. After a while, Miguel stood, brushing the dust from his clothes. "You should head home soon, sir," he said gently. "Long day tomorrow." Daniel smiled faintly. "You sound more like a mentor than a janitor these days." Miguel chuckled. "Maybe I just had good teachers along the way." They said their goodbyes, and as Daniel walked back to his car, he looked over his shoulder one last time. Miguel was still there, surrounded by children, his laughter echoing under the fading light. Something about the scene filled Daniel with peace. The world suddenly felt right, balanced. Later that night, Daniel stood by the window of his penthouse, gazing at the city below. The glass towers still gleamed, but he no longer saw them as monuments of success. They were just buildings. What mattered now was the warmth he carried inside, the connection, the purpose, the quiet gratitude. He whispered to himself, "Wealth isn't what you keep, it's what you give." And for the first time in years, he slept soundly, the city lights shimmering like stars beneath him. True wealth isn't measured by what you earn, but by what you give. If this story moved you, share it to inspire others to lead with kindness. Subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us what really matters, and together, let's spread a little more light in the world.